Hello, Paul Mauro again, back doing our Smart Financial podcast series, which we call Nothing Good. Nothing good happens last minute, especially in our world of long-term planning. And speaking of long-term, today we're very happy to be interviewing Ron Lang, who has been a long-term friend, associate of the firm that I started 50 years ago in 1974, but also Ron has a very interesting life story that puts him into both categories of book one and book two, both a superstar grandparent, which we'll talk about a little bit, and then also a superstar longevity planner who is still actually doing business ventures, and he's doing new exciting things long beyond the age of when people decide to go to Florida and golf full time and sleep on the beach. So welcome, Ron.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
You know, that's not by will, the fact that I'm doing these at 92. I have no choice. It's who I am. And I'm not an ex-athlete. I'm not an ex-golfer. There are many things that I didn't do. And so the things that I did do, I still enjoy doing.
Well,
and
I think that's the number one key. That's the famous Thomas Edison line when they asked him about how hard he worked. He said, "I never worked a day in my life," because every day was fun for him.
Yeah.
And so you're still working, you're still being productive. But let's go back in time a little bit, because I think it's going to be very interesting for some people to hear how you got here today in 2025. We're taping this in Framingham, Massachusetts, right? And who'd have thunk it, as they say. But give us a little bit of the story of where you were born and where you grew up and how you got here.
I was born in Manhattan 1 week after my parents got married on the boat. My mother came as an immigrant. My father was here a year or two before her, sent for her. She came on a boat, and she didn't realize that she'd have to get married to him before she got off the boat. She was an immigrant. And my father said, "That's where we get married." This was 1923-ish. And she said, "What? I only know you for 6 weeks in Europe, you know." And my father said, "Look, you came on this boat to marry me. And if you don't marry me, you're going back on the same boat. They won't let you off the boat." So we got married. They got married at Ellis Island. And that's a whole nother story that I don't need to go into, but she did not consummate the marriage. She actually got on a train and went to Chicago to an aunt, because she didn't really understand that she was going to have to get together with my father. She only knew him for 6 weeks when he was in Europe. It's a long story, different story. But sooner or later they got back together and they started a family. And then came 1929, the big crash. My father, with a 4th grade education, could not make a living. And they were starving. They decided to go back to Budapest, where my mother's father was a police chief.
Okay.
And so they decided to resettle in Europe. And in 1932, my mother got pregnant with me. I left out this story about how they got back together in New York after she went to Chicago, but you don't need that deal. They did get together. And so in 1929, they went back. They spent 3-4 years there. My mother got pregnant with me, and then her father, the police chief, said, "Aranka," that's her name, "you have to go back to America. You're a citizen there, you got to go back."
Oh, so she became a citizen before she had you?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Yes, in the 20s. She had my sister, but not me.
Okay.
And then in 1932, when she was pregnant with me, her father, whose name was Farkas, F-A-R-K-A-S. Everybody in Hungary is named Farkas. It means wolf, like Smith in America.
Okay.
You know? And so he said, "You got to go." And she said, "Why?" And he said, "There's this guy named Hitler making a lot of trouble, and I think it's going to be real bad for the Jews. And you're citizens of America, get out of here."
Oh.
And they got on the boat. My mother was in her 9th month with me. They got into Manhattan, and they got off the boat, and a week later I was born. And they lived in the bottom end of Manhattan for a couple of years before they moved up to the Bronx and started their life in America.
I know when we met years ago, Ron, many years ago, on your table in your office was a little glass cutting instrument.
Yeah, a glass cutter.
Yeah, can you tell the story of the glass cutter?
Oh boy, I should have brought it. My father was a glazer. He became a glazer, a union glazer in Manhattan, and he was a member of the Glazers and Iron Workers Union in New York. And a glazer could take a sheet of glass, they call it a light, by the way, a light, and to put this piece into that frame required taking off a 1/4 inch to fit. And my father was able to take that glass cutter, use this finger as a guide along the edge, and cut off for 16 inches, 1/4 inch, break it off, and throw it away and put the window in. And when I was 15, I started learning how to cut glass. And when I was 16, I was driving his glass truck, and I was an apprentice to the glass and local Iron Workers Union. And I was in high school in Manhattan at George Washington High School, a school for Irish kids and many other immigrants, mostly Irish, and very few blacks were in that school, and probably 15% Jewish. And there are stories I could tell you about that we haven't got the time for. But George Washington High School had an affiliation with CCNY, City College of New York, which was a college based on strictly scholarship. If you had the marks, you can get in. If you didn't, you couldn't. There's no way you could pay your way into CCNY.
Okay. Yeah.
And with all the immigrant kids there, they had lots of people applying. And I went through high school. I got the math medal in my junior year, and then my mother said to me, "If you don't get into City College, it's not so bad. You'll be a glazer. You'll work with your dad, and he makes a decent living. And don't sweat it." She didn't use those words, but she had told me there's no heat, but it would be nice if you get in, because we cannot afford NYU or Fordham University. It wasn't going to happen. You got a City College or nothing. So I applied and I got in, and I got into the engineering school, and I decided that I wanted to be a mechanical engineer to design car engines and stuff like that. And that was the beginning of my engineering career. I went to City, I enjoyed it, I joined a fraternity. That fraternity, Epsilon Nu Gamma, ENG, for engineering. It was an engineering student fraternity.
Oh, interesting.
And we were real nerds, I got to tell you. We were real engineers with our slide rule and the whole deal.
Well, it's interesting that you became an engineer. You know, we have so many folks, including my own brother, who went to engineering school, but didn't really spend his life doing classic engineering. He ended up being a technical advisor for Range Rover Jaguar cars, and my daughter just married an engineer who got bored, went back to school, became an architect. So did you actually ever graduate and do grinded out engineering work for any company?
Great question. You know, in my senior year, by the way, I was not at the top of my class, nowhere near. I was at the bottom of the top quarter. And the biggest break I got at that time was one of the heat transfer professor, Rothberg. Professor Rothberg wrote a book on thermodynamics. And he wanted to have a student impression of the book before he went to press. And he said, "Ron, would you read this book? Read chapter 2 and 4 and 8 and tell me, does it relate to what you're doing?" And out of the blue, he asked me to do that. He was my professor in thermo. And I went home and I spent a few weekends reading it, and I gave him comments. End of story. On the bottom of the first quarter, what I did not know is that he was a consultant for Curtiss-Wright Corporation in New Jersey. And when time came for the graduates, I graduated in June, to get a job, he came over to me and said, "Hey, Ron, I want you to call Joe Blow at Curtiss-Wright. They have a job for you."
Awesome.
So here I am, the bottom of the first quarter. I got the top starting salary of any kid from the engineering class because Curtiss-Wright wanted to have me.
Who knew?
About breaks.
Talk about a break. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit as we go along.
Yeah.
So one of the greatest breaks in your life was meeting Evie. So, and I've had the great pleasure of knowing the two of you for years, and of course she's no longer with us, but apart from that sad part, it was a brilliant partnership for
Let
many,
me
many
tell you something about that, about meeting Evie.
I think everybody wants to hear about
I
how
gotta tell you
this
about
guy
it.
could end up with this awesome woman. How could that happen?
Oh my God. In 1951, my father bought a Dodge Coronet. He bought it because he didn't have to pay tuition for me. He didn't have the obligation to send his son to school, which they wouldn't have done, I don't think. But he had some money and he bought a 51 Dodge Coronet. That was the car that my fraternity brothers and I used to go running around. Nobody else had a car, and this was in the middle of Manhattan, and I always brought the car there. One day, Al Rappaport, my fraternity brother, says to me, "Hey, Ron, I got a date for you. You got my date in the Bronx wants to go up to this club in Westchester County, and we needed somebody with a car." And I was the cash register guy at the Campus Griddle, and I met lots of women. I didn't need that date. And I said, "Al, I don't know why I need to do this." He said, "Please, Rod, I want to take Alice to this place. And she has a friend named Evie." So I go to the Bronx, go up 5 flights of steps on Longfellow Avenue in the East Bronx, knock on the door, and I meet Evie and her kid sister and her parents, and I take her up to the cabin in White Plains. And the four of us go there, spend the evening doing the Lindy and the Foxtrot, and we danced in this club. And the waitress came over and said, "Can I get you folks a drink?" I was over 21. I said, "Of course." So Evie says, "I'll have a Singapore Sling." Evie says. I said, "I never heard of it." And she said, "I'll have a Singapore Sling." I said, "Well, I'll have a CC and ginger because that's what all the men had, you know." So it was a great night. I take her back to Longfellow Avenue at the end of the night, and I say, "Evelyn, this was a very nice evening. How about next week?" You have to understand, I'm a senior in college, okay? She's in Queens College, I learned that night. And that's over the bridge from the Bronx into Queens. And she said, "No, I can't go out with you next week." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "I have a date." "Well, I have something going." Yeah. And I said, "What?" And she then said, "My sweet 16 party."
She was 15 when you took her out.
I'm a senior in college, and she was 15. You didn't know that story.
I didn't know that. So now it's on tape, folks. It's a true thing. Ron, you're a cradle robber.
And she said, "But you can come to the party, but I have an escort." And I said, "No freaking way am I going to come there if I'm not your escort." And so I didn't go. And I tried calling her a couple of times after that, and she was always busy. Oh, by the way, she was only a couple of weeks away from her 16th birthday, but she was at Queens College. She was in college at 16.
Wow.
Yeah. She graduated when she was 19.
Evie, in case you haven't gathered, Dr. Evie Lang was brilliant, beautiful, and as I said, Ron was punching above his weight. Yeah. For those of you who know what that expression means.
So the end of the story was that after turning me down for a few weeks, turned out she had to go to a concert in Queens at night, and she had no way of getting there except the bus. She calls me up and said, "Hey, Ron, how would you like to go to a concert?" And I said, why not? I liked her. It was a nice evening. So that was in May. When she went to camp that summer, to a kids' camp up in New York State, she went up as a counselor. She was wearing my fraternity pin. So I had a lot of work to do in that 6 weeks, but
Good.
That was the beginning of a marriage that lasted 67 and a half years.
And you have great kids. I've had the great pleasure of meeting them and all that. And it's one of the reasons why we wanted to invite you on this Superstar Grandparenting thing, because in addition to all the great things that you've done in your life, you have actually done, and I've been witness to and involved with Ron on taking some of the work ethic from his parents and passing it down, the love of education, passing it down. I mean, you've done some great things in terms of like planning for not just your own kids, but for your grandkids. And let me sort of ask you about that, because, again, knowing how much time and effort that you put in this, people don't become what we call superstar grandparents by accident. I mean, you really have a commitment to education and a commitment to family. Is that because you and your parents were tight? And did you have brothers and sisters?
I had a sister who's passed. She was 8 years older than me, and she was a war bride in World War II. When she was 17, she met the love of her life, and he was going to officers training school out in Pennsylvania. They got married when she was like 18. She was 8 years older than me, and I tell you, when a girl is 8 years older than a kid brother, if it were a boy and a girl, it would have been closer. But she was getting off and married, and we never really had an intimate relationship. We were not enemies, but she went her way. She stayed in New York and then down to Florida. Her husband was a civil engineer, and he was I don't want to say a war hero, but he was one of the first guys to cross the Rhine River into Germany over the bridge at Remagen, which everybody knows about. He was one of the first, 8, 10 guys into Germany at the end of the war. And,
so when you and Evie got married and you had your kids, was this always a plan for the two of you that you were going to focus on your kids' education and maybe some of the things you didn't have growing up because you grew up during that era when things were quite a bit tighter? So tell me about the approach you took with your own kids as far as education is concerned. Was there ever any doubt they were going to go to college?
Of course not.
No.
Of course not. No, never any doubt. I mean, Evie was a perpetual student. She had a couple of different master's degrees, and then she went on to Harvard for a master's, and then she went to Lesley College for a PhD in education. And even though she had a degree in bioscience or biology, she taught biology for a while, then she decided that she didn't want to be a biologist, she wanted to be a teacher. And so she went into teaching, and she ended up being headmaster of a Jewish day school in Newton, Massachusetts.
Solomon Schechter
Day School, where she established a great reputation. And to this day, my daughter Caroline, my youngest daughter, is now a special needs teacher in Watertown, and she started there a year ago. She's found out now that 3 of her co-teachers came up to her and said, I see your middle name is Lang, Carrie Lang, Alleluia. And she said, yeah. Then they would say to her, are you related in any way to Evelyn Lang? And she said, yeah, she's my mother. And they said she was our teacher. 3 of my daughter's colleagues were educated by Evelyn.
Yeah, it's incredible. One of the themes of this grandparenting book, and one of the things of this particular discussion, is how these things get transferred. It's not just that you inherit DNA from your grandparents and your parents, but there is sort of a psychological DNA, and one of the things is about either the drive to educate or to help kids get educated and to make it easy for them to get it.
Right.
Not completely easy, because you're not a pushover, but it seems to me like in the years that we've worked together, Ron, you've had a big focus on not just your kids getting educated, but also, I know in particular, about your grandkids, right?
Well, I mean, I have to say it's 80-20. I mean, 80% Debbie, 20% me. She was really the educator and the one who focused on education. I was off making a living. I thank you for those remarks, but I didn't spend, it wasn't 50-50. It was 65-35. I mean, Evie really managed the education of those kids. On things non-education, like how do you drive a suburban wagon, and how do you hike up a mountain in New Hampshire, and how do you do skiing and stuff like that. That was more my job than Evie. She was not a jock, far from it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there was kind of a split in responsibilities.
Well, you guys were, I mean, just superstar. I mean, I've seen the actual sort of like results of it. Also, I have to say, I mean, all the years we've known each other, you've spent a significant amount of time doing planning for the benefit of your kids.
Oh,
and
boy.
And I have to say,
To this day.
to this day, and people don't understand sometimes, and they sort of take it for granted, but countless hours that we spent, like over the years, for that goal. I mean, you made an investment, and it was an investment of your time and some money too, but just time to plan that for the benefit.
You're right, but
of your kids
Paul,
and grandkids.
I always say I'd rather be lucky than smart, and lucky was that my father bought a Dodge that gave me the ability to pick up Evie in the Bronx, and if he didn't buy that Dodge, if I didn't go to City College, which he now had the money for a Dodge, I never would have met Evie. And so it's fate. Yeah. It's fate.
That was really good luck.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your career a little bit, because speaking of good luck, I will say that one of the things that we're doing here today is bragging a little bit, and I have a little picture I'm going to hold up that we will be talking about more on our next podcast. But in my office in Westboro, Mass, is a picture of Ron, and you'll notice that you can see his young face inside the helmet of this spacesuit that I'm going to let him explain. We're going to go into it actually in depth in our next podcast, which is called The Last Great Adventure, which is going to be hosted by Ron. I'm just going to be his assistant on that. But Ron, tell us how you ended up starting off at City College, starting off at Curtis Wright. How did you end up here inside this spacesuit?
Yeah, well, that was 1964-5 about. I worked for Curtis Wright for, after about 3 months, I was selected to be part of a 90-man team to work on a secret project out in the middle of Pennsylvania, which we were in the Cold War with Russia. And that project got declassified in the 90s. But the project was to put a nuclear-powered bomber at the Dew Line in Canada, to keep a plane in the air for months with the nuclear bomb, so that when they got the word to nuke Russia, they all make a right turn and nuke Russia. That was that project.
Wow.
In the 50s. And so 90 of us were sent out there in the middle of Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere. I won't dwell on it, but it was an impossible job. By the time you put enough shielding around the bomb to protect people in the event of a crash, the plane couldn't take off the ground. So I spent a couple of years there. It was futile. I decided it was not a good place. And Evie and I decided to move back, not to New York, but to the Northeast.
Oh, she was with you in Pennsylvania?
Oh, we got married in 57. She just graduated Queens College, and a month later we got married, and a month later we moved to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
So we started our married life in State College, Pennsylvania, It was marvelous. I loved it. We spent 2 years there, and then we decided to look for a job. And we drew 2 circles around New York, 50-mile radius and 100-mile radius. And we said, we want to live in that annulus. Because the first 50 miles, if we were there, we would have to go to our parents' house every week for dinner. And we didn't want to have to be committed to be right there.
Okay.
I hate to admit this, but we both loved our parents loved us, but we didn't want to do Friday night dinner at her house every week. And we didn't want to be more than 100 miles away. So we said, we're gonna have an annulus. And we looked at a lot of businesses, and I found Windsor Locks, Connecticut. Windsor Locks, Connecticut, the headquarters of United Aircraft Corporation. United Aircraft Corporation had an environmental control system group that designed the atmosphere in passenger jets, pressurization, temperature, moisture, you name it, to keep 200 people alive in a passenger jet was a real technical challenge. And I got into that. I was able to apply to that group in Windsor Locks. We took an apartment in Manchester, Connecticut, which was an easy commute,
Yep.
and we moved there. And so we moved there in 60. I moved in January 60, and she followed me at the end of the semester because she was teaching junior high school in State College.
Okay.
And so then she joined me in Connecticut. And then a year later, we decided to start a family, and the twins came, which we learned, by the way, in the 9th month that we were having twins.
Great planning.
Yeah.
It's about great planning.
One-bedroom apartment, we learned that we were having twins.
So how long were you in Connecticut?
We weren't, as I say, we moved there in 60. And then, by the way, in 57, Sputnik went around the Earth. Mm-hmm. And then in 61, Yuri Gagarin, the Russian, did one orbit around the Earth. And then a month or 2 later, President Kennedy gave his famous speech to the combined houses of Congress that we're going to go to the moon talk. Mm-hmm. And he gave that talk in 61 in May. And in 62, the request for quote, they call it RFQ, the RFQs went out to all the companies in America who could build engines and vehicles and a pressure suit. I am working for 2 years working on pressurization and temperature management, humidity control of a passenger plane. So compress that to a vehicle that's one person, it's not that different to keep a person alive in that vehicle. And there were other issues of like going to the bathroom and the 0G and temperature, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But so we decided to bid on the job. We put together a team of 9 guys to work on the proposal for the Project Apollo spacesuit and backpack. The suit being the vehicle that we had to maintain pressure and humidity control, and the backpack to be the life support system, because they wanted this vehicle to be able to allow a man to walk on the moon. So that was the beginning of it, and that was 62. We worked on that project for 7 or 8 months to just write the proposal. And we submitted the proposal in 62. And I don't remember the month right now, but it was Thanksgiving, of course. We found out in Thanksgiving of 62 that we won the project. Just that week, Monday or Tuesday of Thanksgiving week in 62, we won the job. What I didn't say, and I should have, because it's exceedingly important, we were working under the tutelage, for want of a better word, of Sam Loring, L-O-R-I-N-G, he should rest in peace, smartest guy I ever met, an MIT guy who was the manager of the 9 of us writing that proposal. You wouldn't believe this. Truth is much stranger than fiction. We win the job on Monday or Tuesday. Sam Loring, living in Simsbury, Connecticut, decides that he wants to get a couple of six-packs to watch the football game on Thanksgiving Day. Gets onto his motorcycle and drives into town, into Simsbury, gets a six-pack or two, I don't know, drives back to Simsbury. On the way back, it was raining. He skids, went off the road, and got killed.
Unbelievable.
Sam Loring, our mentor, the guy that none of us needed him to be our arms and legs, and he died. And I didn't hear it on the radio. I show up at work on Monday, and there's a major company meeting to spread the word that we won the program. Well, we had done that on Wednesday, and now we've got to announce a terrible thing, and that Sam was killed over the weekend in an accident. And then the next thing about, this is why we're meeting, Ed Marshall, who is the vice president, also not alive anymore, another brilliant guy, he was VP, and the president of the company were in the room to tell the team that Sam was gone. And then he said, we have to have an interim supervisor for this group, and we'll do a search for a manager. And that interim supervisor is going to be Ron Lang. And I was just one other nerd of 9 guys that busted their humps doing the proposal. I'll never, ever know why they made me the interim manager, but they did. And
well, you said you'd rather be lucky.
yeah, we're going to be lucky.
Right.
So we started working with Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, them coming up. John Young was assigned, each astronaut was assigned a part of the program to observe. And I think his name was John. John Young, one of the astronauts, would fly up to Windsor Locks from Texas once a month to attend our staff meeting. And we worked that way for the better part of a year. No, it was 6 months, because 6 months later, there was an announcement that my status was changed from interim to regular manager. The people in the Manned Spacecraft Center liked me, and they said, why find somebody? Lang is doing a fine job.
That is great. We're going to get into the whole deep details of the process of designing that suit and everything in our next podcast, which is going to be The Last Great Adventure. But this part of your career, which is really a dynamic, exciting thing, lasted how long before the space suit and sort of NASA part of your career changed? How long were you there?
We started the space program with Kennedy's talk, so that was 62. We landed on the moon, I believe, in 69. In 68, I was sent to Houston to go get a master's in biology. No, it wasn't biology. It was related life support at Baylor University. And I went there for the summer. I had 3 daughters at that time. And so Evie and I drove down in our Pontiac station wagon and had a great summer. And at the end of that summer, I found out that my status in the company was changing. They just told me. That was the year that we were going to the moon. The suit was already finished. There was a huge organization in place. And they said, Lang, we decided to leverage the technology from the space program, and we'll get into it later, but the whole idea of measuring people's physiological parameters, ECG and pressure and heart rate, you name it, remotely, has a great application in cardiac units in hospitals. And so we were at the forefront of developing the device to put on a heart attack patient so he could be ambulatory around the hospital. And the same technology that was on the moon, because we were monitoring the astronaut's heart from inside the ship and in Houston. So they decided to start the United Technologies Medical Systems Division, and they made me president.
Okay.
And that was my next promotion.
Okay. And so you were with United Technologies,
Yep.
still doing engineering,
Yep.
a little different kind of role, obviously, as the president of that. And how long were you with them?
I was with them from 89 to 72-ish, when it was pretty clear that United Technologies learned that they were going to have to make a major investment to compete in the medical electronics world. I mean, we had a very, very narrow slice, and they decided to sell the company. And they asked me to help sell it, and the only way we could sell it is if I went with it.
Okay.
You know, and so that ended my United Technology career, got me involved in the startup of a company called Vanguard Medical Systems, which in turn was funded by Becton Dickinson Corporation of New Jersey, a major player. And they had a division in the greater Boston area, in Sharon, Massachusetts, where I moved because my company was absorbed into that division in Sharon, Massachusetts, and we moved there in '74.
And that's where you are to this day, in the same house?
Same house.
Same house that I've been
Yeah.
to a million times.
Yeah.
And so we're coming full circle now. You started off as an engineer, you ended up on the space program, then medical devices, and then they moved you. So you ended up in Sharon, and you got these kids. And so then, as all the years that I've known you, right, you have been a serial entrepreneur, or a serial angel investor, or a serial venture capitalist, whatever term you want to use, but you've had your fingers, way more than 10 fingers, in 10 different pies, right?
Not then.
No?
Not then. I was 100% techie at that time. I wasn't even a good company president. I was too much into the weeds, to be brutally honest.
When did you become an entrepreneur and investor?
In 1979, Becton Dickinson decided that I wasn't good enough for the job to grow the company. There was a senior VP, I won't name his name, in New Jersey at headquarters, that took a dislike to me. And when the opportunity to become president of that division of BD came up, because I was just managing the heart rate monitoring area. When the opportunity came, another guy was selected. And that to me was walking papers. If I didn't get that job, I was going to get the hell out of there. And that was 1979. On my birthday, I got fired. And I spent the next 3-ish years went to digital equipment for a year, and it was just too big, and I had too small a role, and I didn't like it. I went to 2 other companies, I didn't like them, and then got involved with a company that was in the computer business, and it started in 1983, and I worked with them until '88. And in '87, I said to myself, I'm going to be 55 years old in a year, and that means that if I spend the rest of my career here, I'm going to be forced to retire at age 65. And I can't imagine retirement. And when I was 55, I decided to start my own company.
Okay,
and that's, the answer to your question was that I was beginning to look around what I should do, and a co-member of my congregation came over to me one day. I was president of my congregation. Came over to me one day, and we had a chat, and he was a turnaround consultant. Never heard of turnaround consultant. And he said, Ron, he said, you're a manager, you have technical skills, you ought to be a turnaround guy. And we go into companies that are in trouble, and we solve the problem or we shoot them in the head. And it seems to me something that you could do.
Well, Ron, over the years, the reason that I think you cross over from being in the superstar grandparent category to the longevity category, you and Ray Kroc are very similar. And for people that don't know the story of Ray Kroc, he didn't even start McDonald's till he was 57, right? And he bought the technology from a couple of guys that were selling blenders and different types of restaurant ware. And he thought,
amazing.
I could actually do something with. So your entrepreneurial DNA
really came into play then.
In your 50s, right?
In 55, I didn't want to be forced into retirement 10 years later.
And tell me if you even know the number of companies and enterprises that you've been involved in since the last 30, 40 years. I mean, it's got to be dozens.
Oh, many dozens.
Many dozens?
Yeah.
Many dozens.
Because, I started Ron Lang Associates in 1960, in 90. Let me be more accurate, 50 years on top of it. In 88.
88?
In 88, I started RLA, Ron Lang Associates. And I started it by looking to get a good job in the industry first. And I got an interview with the company where my friend who recommended it, I got an interview with his company, which was a large consulting firm. And after about 10 minutes or 15 minutes, the interviewer starts this business, looking at his watch. And I could tell he was no longer interested in talking to me. And the interview ended in 20, 25 minutes. And he said to me, Mr. Lang, he said, you're 55 years old. He said, you have no selling experience. You're an engineer. You really should not start your own company. You don't know anything about sales or marketing, and you shouldn't do it. You're doing very well where you are, and stay with Digital Equipment or somebody like that. And he threw me out, absolutely threw me out. And then that's when I went home to Evie and I said, I'm going to go into that business and I'm going to eat that freaking guy's lunch.
Because you are a little bit competitive. Yeah. So in the big scheme of things, I know we're going to talk a lot about the space program and everything in our next podcast that we do, but it's interesting to me that among your children, has this entrepreneurial urge dripped down to any of them?
No.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. That's why I thought I'd ask you about it.
No, they're all a piece of Evie. They're all educators.
Highly educated.
I'd
say highly educated.
Highly
kids.
educated, all of them. They're more solo. They're more single operated. They're not terribly social, although Debbie is. But the other two are task oriented. And I don't want to denigrate them in any way.
No, it's just it's interesting to me among the grandparents that we've worked with over the years, and again, trying to get 50 years of grandparenting experience into one bite is kind of tough.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that certain things do transfer,
Yeah.
and of the things that you and Evie did with your kids and with your grandkids when they came along, and you have a great herd of grandkids, right? So did you end up spending a lot of time with them, or are you so busy working that's the thing that...
Thank you for asking that. I spent a lot of time with them. Evie and I spent a lot of time with them. When we moved to Massachusetts, to Sharon, at the same time, we didn't know we were going to move to Sharon until it happened. We decided when we were still in Manchester, Connecticut, that we were really enjoying hiking in the White Mountains. We started that about 5 or 6 years before. And we were building a cabin in the White Mountains, a vacation cabin, when my new job opportunity came up to move from Connecticut to Massachusetts. So I built 2 houses at the same time. We were building the cabin and we started building a house in Sharon. And that was the beginning of years, almost till now. I can't do it anymore, but of hiking with my girls, and of the 47 or 48 peaks that are 4,000 footers. Evie and I did 43 of them, and the girls have done all of them.
So you came back to New England, you loved hiking, so it sounds to me like you actually transferred a love of the outdoors and hiking and maybe some of the free time that you could have as an entrepreneur to your kids and your grandkids.
I would hope that's right, but I don't think I had more free time. I had less free time when I was self-employed, but maybe I used it more effectively because we spent a lot of time traveling. Oh, key, two of my sons-in-law ganged up on me in the 97 time frame and forced me into buying a sailboat, and because they were sailors.
Okay.
So the family became sailors also. We had a nice, beautiful catamaran, and we kept it down in near Rhode Island, and we sailed all around the Cape and the Vineyard, up to Maine. We sailed up and down the Boston coast, and we had that sailboat until 2007-ish, 2008. We kept it 12 years. It was a wonderful experience.
So let's just talk about this a little bit as we sort of wrap up this whole career. It seems to me like you were kind of living the life that people talk about, of the work, the life, the balance. It doesn't sound to me like you, even though you worked hard and you were an entrepreneur, that you didn't starve your family for your attention. You spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah, no. Part of the secret was I worked out of my home. My home was headquarters. And
Way
so,
before people all worked out of their houses.
Yeah, oh yeah. I didn't feel a need to have an office because our business side was the clients. You know, we were going to try to fix a company that was sick. You do it there, not in your home office. So I didn't need a place.
And tell me how you and Evie handled it when, like, the grandkids came along and maybe your kids needed help. Did both of you continue to work full time, or did Evie sort of back off a little bit and help the girls?
Evie was headmaster in the 90s, and then they got married in the early 90s, and at that time, she decided to retire and go for a PhD.
Okay.
She goes for a PhD in her 60s.
That's Evie.
And so she and her daughters went to school at the same time, practically, you know.
Wow.
And she spent a lot more time with them than I did, but no, I was very much involved with them and their husbands. It was we had an ideal setup geographically because they were close by, well, sort of close by. One daughter is in Arlington, one daughter is in Newton, and the other daughter is in Vermont.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, I think if you were to sort of look back, I mean, all of us kind of get retrospective, you know, now. So is there anything that you would have done differently? You know, like the typical question, some of them don't really apply to you, but would you have retired earlier, worked longer, you know, moved near the grandkids? Well, you have them. They're all around you.
Retirement was never an option. At age 55, I decided to go into my business so I would never have to retire. So I'm a director now of a very active and dynamic company that is not just giving advice. I'm actively involved with them in many different ways and help train some of the executives. I guess train is the wrong word. What do you call it when you're...
Well, you're consulting with them. You're mentoring them, right?
Right.
But so retiring to Florida and golfing and laying on the beach was never in the cards for you?
I golfed once in my life in Pennsylvania when we got married, moved to Pennsylvania. And on a Saturday, I went out with a couple of guys, and I said to myself, I'm spending 3-4 hours here. My weekends are short and Evie's alone in the house. What's wrong with this picture? And that was my first and only golf game of my life. And that was it.
Well, there is no special formula, that's for sure. And I've been interviewing grandparents and parents as I've been writing these books and trying to compress all this experience. And I have to say that there's no special formula, but you and Evie seem to, over the years, and the reason that I asked you to talk about this a little bit, it seems like you had one of the greatest partnerships for not just working, but parenting and grandparenting. I mean,
it's 7 months, and you're absolutely right. Thank you for saying that and noticing it. These 7 months without her have been absolutely awful without her. And I'm only now beginning to transition from bereavement to appreciation. Instead of spending my time bereaving, I'm appreciating all the time I had with her. And
well, it's easy to see from our standpoint, again, and the reason that I asked Ron to come, he's had obviously, one of those experiences that takes a little time to recover from, and I felt that this was the time when maybe we could talk about it without either one of us breaking down, and also because for those folks that are watching and the people that are following our podcast about superstar grandparenting and parenting, I mean, Ron and Evie exhibited their plan, and as Ron's always been a planner, and what I've seen, he's always been, engineering the right solution. That they devised the plan, they worked the plan, they worked together to great result for the kids, especially because you transferred to them not just the work ethic, the education focus, the
family focus,
and the family first thing, right? And it allowed them, I think, from what I've seen, had the freedom that they could have you as a backstop, so that they could, accomplish more things in their life, right? So I'm going to sort of end this with a little bit of a sort of a reminder that Ron Lang is here in one capacity as part of our Superstar Grandparent series, but I'm going to be bringing him back to do something special in our next podcast, which is called The Last Great Adventure. It's actually a presentation that I've seen done. I think that to everybody's sort of detriment, no one's ever really recorded it in full for long-term historical purposes, but we're going to do it, and it is the detailed study of how this young fellow over here ended up inside this suit in this picture, right? And the entire process of getting a man to the moon and bringing him back alive in one piece, living up to sort of the Jack Kennedy pledge to the American people in the great speech he gave. So stick with us again and follow along next time on the Smart Financial Podcast, and you'll hear the last great adventure story. I'll see you again next time on Smart Financial.